people can give evidence on oath and subject to being questioned about what they have to say. What will then happen in regard to this committee, the committee will make a report at the end to the Minister, who's the Minister of Sport, and it is up to him to decide what he wants to do. Obviously, we will make recommendations or findings, and these will, of course, be based on the evidence. There are a number of people who have given us submissions in writing, and we obviously, as I've said, will look at them. We've fixed on a provisional timetable. Obviously, everybody can't give evidence on the first day, and we're going to try to avoid having inconveniencing people, requiring them to sit around and do nothing. I'm rapidly getting tired of this machine. I'm rapidly going to throw it away. There should be a stenographer who writes this down. Apparently there isn't one. Does this work all the time now? Right, another piece of equipment. Please bear with me, and I'm sorry. The provisional timetable, to avoid people having to sit here all day until they give their evidence, is roughly this. We will start today, the 12th of February, hopefully shortly after we'll finish these introductory remarks. It's now 10:25, and we will start, I think, with the evidence of Mrs. Lowe or Miss Lowe and some other witnesses relating to her submissions. And this committee will then sit today. I think we'll take a short adjournment at 11:15 for tea, and we will resume at 1 o'clock, and we will have a lunch break until 2 o'clock, and we'll go on from 2 o'clock until 4 o'clock. We will then meet again on Thursday of this week, starting at 10 o'clock, and we will indicate then, or even hopefully before then, what new witnesses will be required. Then from the 26th of February till the 3rd of March, the committee will resume its affairs. All these hearings, unless we advise otherwise, will take place here at Ellis Park. I hope everybody's now been able to find this venue, and at 10 o'clock hopefully we'll start. And the final hearing will be on the 5th of March, where we'll wind everything up. Hopefully we'll be able to stick to these times. So I don't know if there are any questions anybody wants to ask. Please feel free to do so. All right, so without further ado, I think we'll start with our first witness, Mrs. Lowe. Is it Miss Lowe? Oh, there she is. Thank you. If you would, the witness stand is on the left here. I hope the machine works where you have to speak. Just test it to see.
How's that? Is that working?
Yeah. Right, is it Mrs. or Miss?
Ms. I'm one of these annoying modern women.
You're a modern woman's liver, okay.
Afraid so.
What are your full names?
My name's Robin Gale Lowe.
Right, do you raise your right hand? Do you swear that the evidence you're about to give here so help me God?
So help me God.
Good, thank you. If you feel more comfortable, you can sit whenever you like. But I don't know if you can share with me.
There is, thank you very much.
Okay. All right, you read your submissions, and we just try to find them. we summarized essential elements of inputs received from you. And we've got your cell number, and I gather you're a journalist and you write newspaper articles principally attached to sport, is that right?
Yes, I work for a horse racing publication called the Sporting Post.
Oh, good. Well, that seems to be spot on. You've obviously addressed yourself to this question of SASCOC.
Yes.
Is there anything you want to highlight for us as to what you have said in your submissions?
I think probably the only bit that wasn't included in the submissions was relating to the relationship between horse racing and SASCOC itself, mainly because I was writing for a racing audience and kind of presumed that they already had the knowledge. So just to put yourselves in the picture, how SASCOC relates to the racing industry, it goes back a little bit, but in the late 90s, horse racing as a sport had been run as separate clubs, separate sporting clubs, and each little almost...
Is horse racing an Olympic sport?
No, it isn't. No, it isn't.
I understood, I might have it completely wrong, please correct me if I'm wrong, that in order to be, you have to be a member of the International Federation. Is that wrong?
You need to have an affiliation. Discipline needs to have an affiliation to team body recognized by SASCOC, have a member.
It's related to
just legalize that the trigger. The late 80s, horse racing was the only legal gamble in town, and then we saw the so on, which changed a lot of things, I guess, for a lot of people. And assets unit into a company which has become known as Pumalelo, which runs all our quite a lot larger. Put into the company, the racing clubs were given a share, it was roughly 33, 34, 35%. The shares issued in Pumalelo, because it's now a listed company, and those were then held into what we've called the Racing Trust. So when we put together the Racing Trust, there were 7 trustees, and of those, 5 of those trustees are appointed by the racing industry, sort of, and 2 of those trustees are members of SASCOC, one being Vinesh Maharaj and the other being Gideon Sam. And the 2 of them are also involved, to the best of my knowledge, in a company called Gride Investments. Representing members, racehorse owners in the country. The head of that organisation, Larry Weinstein, sort of took charge of the Jockey International, and he took it upon himself to, as part of the event, arrange for the South African jockeys to be deemed Team South Africa and for them to get SA colours. So this was, I think, starting in about 2008, if I remember correctly. And for a few years, that was no problem. The way he managed to get that done was there was a gentleman called Tony Lewis who was involved with the Equestrian Federation at the time. The name has changed a little bit over the years. With his assistance, Racing registered our regulatory body, which we call the National Horse Racing Authority. It used to be called the Jockey Club, but it's now the NHA. And they were accepted as a member of the Equestrian Federation, and then via the Equestrian Federation, in theory, that was how they then applied for South African colours. I don't know whether you will recall, but when they had the Olympics in London, there was a bit of a controversy over one of the event riders that went along, a gentleman by the name of Paul Hart, and there was some difficulties over how he'd qualified. So that then prompted a change in how the Equestrian Federation...
That's what I wanted to ask you. Initially there was no problem with the award of colours.
Correct.
That then changed.
Yes.
When did it change precisely?
I believe...
Roughly.
Let me just double check for you. In about 2011, the changes at the SAEF, I think it happened over quite a period of time, but I believe it was finally...
Were there any reasons given for the change?
I'm afraid I'm not as au fait with the Equestrian Federation administration as I am with racing.
Because I understand, and we've seen it, there are regulations of the body which deal with the award of colours. Have you looked at those regulations?
For the Equestrian Federation, I know a little bit, only through my coverage of the Jockey International, which is where I, got an interest. I am a horse rider, but I'm afraid not good enough to trouble the Equestrian Federation for colours myself. So it's not been an area I've really had to think about.
So you don't know whether the regulations say it or not?
Whether the regulations say what?
Deal with colours.
As far as I'm aware, they do, and that was what I found out when I was covering the Jockey International.
But you say that the regulations permit of the award of colours and not to take them away or not award them?
As I understand it, there is a procedure to be followed, and as we covered earlier on, that if a sporting discipline wants to be eligible to give members their South African colours, that they need to belong to an umbrella sporting body of some sort.
Do you know whether that was done here?
Well, so originally, we apparently, the National Horse Racing Authority, or the Jockey Club, were awarded membership with the Equestrian Federation, and thereby through SASCOC. So for the first few years, that was fine. Then, following the Olympic difficulties, they had a rethink and they restructured, as I understand it. There's still some teething problems with that, but they then asked the racing industry to confirm their membership and to sign up to the new constitution and the new changes. Racing didn't like that idea, so they said, thanks very much, but we're out, we're going to resign. And that happened in, I believe, 7th of October or early October 2011. And that was when the NHA was still, our chairman was a gentleman by the name of Rob de Kock. Our CEO.
I think you put your finger on it. The basis upon which horse racing claims to have some rights is via the Equestrian Association.
Yes.
Is that right?
Correct.
And the Equestrian Association is part of an Olympic sport.
That's correct.
Is
yes.
that people who jump over hurdles and do all kinds of things? That's
the
equestrian.
Yes.
That's not horse racing.
Well,
it's done with horses, but still.
Yes, so the Equestrian Federation covers a large number of disciplines, from 10 pegging to endurance riding to show jumping.
I see.
So
you claim your rights via that body?
Yes, up until 2011 when we resigned.
So you don't belong to the Equestrian Society anymore?
Well, this is where it gets interesting. No, we're not, currently. So when the National Horse Racing Authority resigned their membership, they'd sort of forgotten that they had the Jockey International pending in November of that year. So they then went back to the the Equestrian Federation said, oops, terribly sorry, could we just unresign quickly because we need to have our colours?
Getting more complicated.
Correct.
So did the Equestrian Society then resign?
Well, they then accepted the racing industry back again. We had our international, and then
No,
racing...
but did they cease to be members of SASCOC?
No, they're still members of SASCOC.
Oh, I see. So what did they resign from?
No, the racing industry separated themselves from the Equestrian Federation. The Equestrian Federation remains as they were. They've just had some internal structural changes. So the Equestrian Federation would manage a wide number of equestrian sports across South Africa. And because racing didn't have any other sporting discipline to fit under, the equestrian body seemed the most appropriate. So that's how they made application via the Equestrian Federation, who at the time were happy to accept them. Does that make sense?
What you're talking about is the Jockeys International Challenge.
And how our membership with SASCOC relates to that.
Now,
Yeah.
I understand from a summary of the submissions that back in 2008, somebody called Larry Weinstein,
Yes.
who was the acting CEO of the Racing Association.
Yes, he's
That's
still
the
there.
body you're talking about.
Yes, they're our ownership
As
body.
well as the director, Mr. Neil Smith.
No, Mr. Smith is actually, he's a director of a company called 10,000 Stallions. That's
Yes, that's something else.
yes, he was just
10,000
helping.
Stallions management. I didn't know there were 10,000 stallions. So
Fortunately,
what does he do?
well, he manages that particular company, and they manage sporting events, and
And are they in agreement with what you have to say?
you'd have to check that with them.
You don't know. All right. And then, of course, what you told us, for some reason, the new organisers insisted on building in an extra feature and assisting that South African squad be granted their Protea collars.
That's correct, yes, which they got via the Equestrian Federation.
Now, you then refer to SASCOC's constitution, which is a matter that obviously we're going to investigate as to whether they do things properly.
Yeah.
Because I think, to summarise your complaint, I may have it wrong, you say that SASCOC has not run its affairs properly.
I would, that certainly is my impression from the communication I had following the Jockey International over a number of years.
You're concerned in regard to racing.
Yes, if I may just indulge you a little bit, after the 2011 event, when we'd resigned our membership, unresigned our membership, and then re-resigned the membership, we got to quite a tricky situation in 2012, where the racing bodies, the racing organisation, I suppose community, again wanted to hold their Jockey International, and again they went and said and advertised that we would be awarding jockeys national colours. And thanks to quite a number of people, we went and, being aware of the issues that had arisen in 2011, told them that we couldn't possibly award colours because we were no longer a member of the Equestrian Federation, so therefore we had no recourse to SASCOC.
Of course, the problem was, as far as you were concerned, is getting attachment to the Equestrian Federation.
That's correct.
Because if you didn't have that, you couldn't get to the SASCOC.
Correct.
I think that, or I understand it, Mr. Larry Weinstein tried to persuade the Equestrian Federation to accept you, and he couldn't do that.
That's correct. But where it gets, where the SASCOC, the question mark over SASCOC comes in, is the following year in 2013, where again we were faced with the same problem and the same process, and again went through the same conversation. And Larry, when I again raised the whole issue, the National Horse Racing Authority, who was headed up by a chap called Denzel Pillay at the time, he was our CEO, he produced an email from Vinesh Maharaj to say, you know, Larry, I've spoken to my CEO and it's perfectly fine for you to go ahead and award the jockeys your Protea colours, have a lovely event, and I think there was an undertaking that he would try and attend. So they then did go ahead and award colours. I don't know how, because I'd confirmed several times over that we had not, there had been no way that we had been able to reinstate our membership with the SAEF. So quite how Mr. Maharaj and or Mr. Reddy could possibly have condoned the awarding of Protect colours to our jockeys remains a mystery. I questioned them several times on it. I questioned the Racing Association. I questioned the National Horse Racing Authority, and I still don't have a clear answer on that.
Then there's a Mr. Tubby Reddy, who we've heard about.
Yes.
He's been dismissed from SASCOC,
Yes.
but we're going to be inquiring into him later in this investigation.
Well, he was
And,
copied on all my
confirmed that
correspondence.
no Jockeys Association in South Africa was registered as a member of the Equestrian Federation. That's what he said.
Well, correct.
And he said that therefore it follows that you have no rights to claim colours, etc.
No, not exactly. The email from Mr. Maharaj in 2013 stated in writing, and I do still have a copy of that email, that...
You have that email?
I do, yes.
I wonder if you could hand it up to us. Is it in? We've got it, I'm sorry. Yeah.
It is, yes.
We've got it. It's in the
and I
body.
can...
International Jockeys Challenge.
That's
an article that you wrote.
Yes.
So we have got it.
So my query is that Mr. Maharaj stated in writing that he had received confirmation from the CEO, who's Tubby Reddy. I do beg your pardon.
Then the question that has to be asked that we've got in our summary is why suddenly after a single email from SASCOC, which you referred to, because Mr. Larry Weinstein got an email from a gentleman called Maharaj, who's also been dismissed from SASCOC. And we're also going to look at what he has to say. The question which was raised is why after a single email which has been referred to, would it suffice as permission for awarding the national colours to the international challenge in contradistinction to the Constitution?
Correct.
That's the question that's posed.
Yes.
And the answer they give, or Reddy gives, is that you don't belong to the Equestrian Association.
Well, Mr. Reddy was copied in on all my correspondence over a period of about 3 years, where I questioned the entire process the whole way through. So he had knowledge the whole way. Both himself, his secretary, or PA, I think it is Jean Kelly, and a couple of, I think the lady's name was, I'm so sorry, Bongi Langa was the lady in the office that I did correspond with. So, as I said, I wasn't not being clear and transparent in my communications. When I started following the story or trying to find out what was going on, I immediately contacted SASCOC. I immediately, posed my questions to them. I said, this doesn't sound right given the information I'm getting both from the Equestrian Federation and then again from the racing folks. None of it was adding up. So Mr. Reddy, thank you so much. Mr. Reddy was, privy to all of that. And if he'd had an issue with any of it, he had every opportunity to raise that at any point over that 3-year period, which he didn't.
Anything else you want to add by emphasize?
No, I don't think so. It probably covers most of it.
Well, I'm going to hand it over to my committee member.
Ms. Lowe, can I just get some clarity? You're speaking on behalf of the NHA?
No. No, I write for a newspaper, a horse racing newspaper called The Sporting Post. So my interest in the whole event was really from a journalism point of view, and also from covering the event, and then just as a, I suppose, busybody member of the general public, I kind of like things to be done properly and to run by the rules. And if they're not, then I tend to get a little annoyed.
So just, I want to just get to one point.
Sure.
So what you were raising in your, by way of these articles,
Yes.
is that the NHA was not affiliated to the Equestrian Federation at the relevant time.
No.
That Larry Weinstein then set up Jockeys International.
He was running the International. He had been running the International since 2008. But we only had our membership up until 2011.
And then through the Equestrian Federation, the jockeys in his club were awarded colours.
Up until 2011, and then we had another incident where they were in 2013. They weren't given colours in 2012, but thanks to the email from Mr. Maharaj in 2013, they did award colours, even though racing or the National Horse Racing Authority did not have any affiliation to the Equestrian Federation that year, and we haven't since, to the best of my knowledge.
So in 2013, you're saying that Jockeys International wasn't affiliated to the Federation?
It wasn't, and they were awarded colours regardless.
Now, just in terms of that email,
Yes.
it suggests that colours are going to be awarded. Do you know as a fact that colours were in fact awarded?
They were, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I just clarify one thing. So the important person to talk to, I don't know if he's here, I don't know who's here, is Mr. Larry Weinstein. Is he here?
No, I haven't seen him.
You know who he is?
Yes.
So he would be the man who represents, as it were, the racing body.
He represents the Racing Association, and they were the organisers of the event.
They're the people who would complain about the colours.
Correct.
I don't want to demean your status
No,
as
no,
a
no,
journalist.
of course.
You're entitled to write about it with pleasure. But the man who directs the affairs
Correct.
is Weinstein.
That's
So
right.
maybe we should ask Weinstein what he's got to say.
I think it would be interesting to hear his opinion and his version of events. Yes.
Yeah. I'm going to ask Dr. Bacher whether he wants to know anything.
So I do think simply, totally clear. So you have 2018.
Yes.
Let's leave out 2013 as well to be clear in my mind.
Okay.
Olympics around the corner. Those are race horses, they're not eligible, correct?
Correct. They, yeah.
Those are jump horses, they're eligible.
Yes.
Olympic.
Yes.
In South Africa in 2018 is your issue, very simply, that those horse races, they're not eligible to be more affiliated to the jumping association. That is the issue, is that right?
Yes, to the equestrian body, the equestrian
That's the bottom
federation.
line.
Yes.
And therefore you have an event and it's horse racing against overseas counterparts, they say you're not eligible to give them national cards.
Correct.
So that's simply the issue.
Yes, and also the fact that we did have an event where we awarded colours and we were not
That's the
eligible.
issue.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. We will consider whether we should try and invite Mr. Weinstein, but on the face of it, it seems to me he's the right man. Would you agree to talk about this?
Yes, he would definitely be able to shed some light as the organizer of the international. Unfortunately, the CEO of the NHA at the time has subsequently left the organization.
Just to summarize it again, I think I've already said it. Essentially, your complaint against SASCOC is that they didn't follow the correct procedure.
Yes, and that they appeared to give permission to hold an event and award colours.
Of course, this is essential to something that we are going to be inquiring into.
Great.
Thank you very much for your attendance.
Thank you very much for listening.
We're going to have a 5-minute break to check on the stenographer.
The racing people, obviously, the competition, are they awarded colours? So I was about it.
Kan ik krijgen klank alsjeblieft? Kan ik krijgen klank van je vrienden? Ja.
Right, what happened to that register? Mr. Bosso, what happened to that register that I've got?
they're here. Yeah, they're here.
Oops, sorry. It's working.
Hello. Right. Okay. Right, Mr. Askin.
No, the Santos.
Are you Mr. Santos?
Oh.
Do you have any objection to taking the oath?
Not at all.
Would you raise your right hand? Do you swear that the evidence that you're going to give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help me God.
So help me, I do.
You may be seated if you wish to.
Thank you.
I understand you've given us some writing about your role in this matter.
Correct.
Essentially, you are concerned with racing and particularly equestrian society.
Sport in general.
Sport in general.
So
All right. What is your profession or what do you do?
I'm a businessman. I run a big multinational company, and so just give you a background. I have represented South African karate, and in the early 90s when we came back from out of singing, and right back in those early days saw how athletes were getting very little assistance. By default ended up in sports administration. I was the president of South African Karate in the early 2000s. Left it because of, that's the time of the SASCOC birth and all the structures, and actually left sports administration right up until 2012 when my daughter came into show jumping. And at that time, SASCOC had approached equestrian to be restructured, as we say. So they came with a proposal that they would only deal with one equestrian federation, and all sports involving a horse would fall under one federation. It would be almost the same as to say all sports that have a ball should operate under one federation. Since then it's been complete turmoil. With the jockey club been in, then they've been out, some of the Olympic disciplines been represented. I, in 2013, became the president of South African Show Jumping and had a lot of interactions with SASCOC around, let's call it the force structure. It wasn't the proposed structure, it was the force structure. And highlighted to them it was never going to be functional. So what they were trying to achieve at the time is you had one equestrian federation, however they had sporting codes underneath that belonged to multiple world bodies. in itself that created conflict. The only equestrian federation that has IOC recognition is the FEI. They have 7 disciplines, of which 3 participate in the Olympics, which is show jumping, dressage and eventing, and at the Paralympics, dressage. And the structure became non-functional. It was driven down from SASCOC. We had multiple meetings. I personally met with Mr. Gideon Sam, took him through the proposal, highlighted that it was never going to be functional. I believe even as we speak today, karate is sitting with a legal debate on the same basis where all the martial arts have to be under one federation. And it's non-functional. You've got an equestrian body at the moment that's non-compliant with financials. It has support of SASCOC or certain members of SASCOC, and it's restructured 4 times in 6 years.
Just to summarize, maybe I have it wrong. Your complaint basically is the organisation of the Equestrian Federation, am I wrong?
Well, it's the forced restructure. Correct.
Essentially, the Equestrian Society organisation, not necessarily SASCOC.
No.
So if the Equestrian Society, according to you, got their affairs in order, there would be no problem with SASCOC.
No, that's not correct.
Ah.
The restructure was mandated by SASCOC. Prior to the
restructure of what?
Equestrian sport.
They restructured it.
Correct.
And you say they did that wrongly or badly?
Wrongly, badly, without any understanding of the complexities of the sport. I'll give you a good example. You cannot, it would be making the same assumption that all ball sports should be under one federation.
I see.
Cricket and rugby could never be under one federation. The fact that the common denominator is a horse doesn't make it that they all comply. Let's take show jumping. Show jumping has got its own world body, and polo have got their own world body. Polo is not a member of the IOC and have different rules and structures. So could you have an overarching equestrian, let's call it holding company, that passes down?
Who was in charge of SASCOC, as far as you know, when this restructure took place?
Well, at the time, in my involvement, it was Gideon Sam. I personally sat with Gideon, took him through we had agreed.
And he directed the reorganisation?
No, the reorganisation actually started in 2010. There were the structure, I wasn't part of the administration.
He carried it through afterwards?
Correct. And since then we've had a few more.
Ask him what he did or what he didn't do.
Absolutely. I think there was no involvement or consultation from the actually administrators of the sport. It was a bulldoze. There will only be one body, regardless of how many world bodies. They put the structure through, and it's exactly the same complexities that exist in SASCOC. Originally, SASCOC members were only federations. I believe now that the provincial councils have a vote. Now, the exact same structure was forced into SAEF, where originally the voting powers laid between the 14 disciplines. That then was taken away and said that regardless, and let's take show jumping. Show jumping is a legal entity. It's a registered NPO. It has provincial structures, very similar to Dr. Ali Bakr would understand the cricket. It has provincial committees. They have a national committee. And at the time of the restructure, the chairperson of show jumping would sit on the board, or let's call it the council of SAEF. They then instructed, at the time, Gideon, that all these legal entities had to disband. Show jumping would become a technical committee, and then we would have a provincial structure that would consist of 14 different sports. Now, and the complexity and the amount of administrators they were asking was never going to make sense. Equestrian in itself is not a big discipline or sport. Across all the disciplines, they have less than 9,000 members. Show jumping, being one of the biggest, only has 3,500 members. A lot of our top competitors are not based in South Africa due to the restriction we have with movement of horses. They are based in Europe. A new instruction that's come through, and that's just the lack of understanding, is that you cannot represent South Africa if you don't come back and compete in the South African Championships. Now, if anyone understands the mechanics of show jumping or horse sport, you can't move your horses in and out the country. We're one of the few that have got horse sickness. It takes 90 days to take your horses out. And in fact, most of our professional athletes in show jumping are based in Europe, and they qualify via Europe. They have no mechanism to bring the animals into South Africa to compete at the highest level. So there just actually isn't an understanding. It's a one brush that paints over everything.
Is there anything else you want to highlight in regard to this?
No, and I think, like I said, I have personal experience from karate. The involvement in karate when I was competing.
Have they got it right as far as karate is concerned?
I'm sure you're getting submissions from karate. There's a legal battle with karate and SASCOC at the moment, and it's on the same basis. They said all martial arts will now be under one body.
But you're not speaking about that.
No, and I don't need to.
I will get somebody else on karate, as long as we don't have to indulge in it. All right, I'm going to ask my fellow committee member, Ms. Kabi, to ask you anything.
Mr. De Santos, in your submissions, you took issue with SASCOC's constitution. Is that a kind of ancillary issue that you're raising, or are you abandoning that?
No, I'm not abandoning it at all. I think they operate totally out of their mandate. And I think if you look at SASCOC's clear mandate is high performance sport. With the current changes that they have changed, it doesn't address their key mandate, which is high performance sport. And in actual fact, I think a question that was asked earlier is that there was an understanding that there were only members of the IOC or sporting that are members of SASCOC. That's not correct. There are very small sports now that are part of SASCOC that are not at the Olympics. Some of them, I mean, you take equestrian. We've got a discipline, equitation, which hasn't even got a world body, and ultimately gets, and we're not saying that they shouldn't get recognition. The clear purpose of SASCOC, I think the waters have been muddied substantially of what their sole objective is.
If the federation, Equestrian Federation, took into account the difficulties you raised with the equestrian sport, would that resolve your issue? For instance, the disqualification to obtaining South African colours, for instance, in circumstances where you're not participating in South African sports? No,
the structure is non-functional, and ultimately I think it's got to go back and make it functional from the sporting perspective. So if you look at the FEI disciplines, which are an Olympic structure, they need to be part of a structure that creates an opportunity that allows athletes to eventually get to the Olympics. And the current structure now has no way of actually producing any Olympic athletes. So, and purely because you have a lot of different interests. So the Olympic sports or FEI sports should be a standalone equestrian structure. Polo should be a standalone because they've got their own world bodies. And what is required for polo is not a requirement for show jumping. So currently, no. The structure is non-functional. And at this rate, it will never produce Olympic athletes. And surely the objective of any of these structures is to get people to compete at the highest level.
All right, Dr. Bacher.
Mr. Santos, simple questions again to help me. In South Africa, in the horse industry, how many different entities are? How many is racing, there's polo, there's jumping, how many?
There's about 15.
15 different?
Correct.
Of those 15, how many participate in the Olympics?
3.
Only 3.
Correct.
And what you're saying to us, the main question is that, for better or for worse, SASCOC have said all 15 have got to come together under one body.
Correct.
And you say it's not manageable, it's not feasible, it's impractical.
Correct.
That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
We'll pass on to the next witness.
Thank you.
Thank you. I passed around a register at the beginning. What has happened to it? Has anybody filled it in? Where is it? I've got it back. Has everybody completed this? I don't think so. I'm going to pass it round again, please. Some of the latecomers, if you could complete it. The next person we'd like to talk to is Mr. Askin. Is he here?
How are we going?
Right. Mr. Askin, do you have any objection to taking the oath?
Not at all.
Would you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear that the evidence you're about to give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Please raise your right hand and say, so help me God.
So help me God.
Thank you. We have a written submission or a summary of what you had to say. I wonder if there's anything you want to highlight from that for us. I'm going to just find it. You've got it there. Yes. Thank you. Let's see. I forgot to ask you and the other witnesses, I don't think it matters much. What is your full name?
My name is Rogan Askin.
Okay. I found your written submission. You are very much concerned with the disqualification of a Mr. Murray. Is that right?
No.
Oh. Oh, I'm sorry I put this wrong.
No problem.
No. I was looking at the wrong story. Yours is the last one. Yes. Yeah, you're a member of the body that we've been talking quite a bit about at the
Indeed.
moment. That's the Equestrian
Yes.
Federation.
Yes.
What is your capacity there?
So for a living, I train people in horse riding. I manage a competitive venue north of Johannesburg, but I've served on committees all my life, and I do some professional television commentary. I judge, a sort of bit of jack of all trades. I do everything in the sport.
All right. And that body, you've heard the complaints that they deal with membership of SASCOC. They are members of SASCOC, aren't they?
Yes.
But
Yes.
they are still members.
Yes.
And the question which arises, you may have heard, I think Ms. Lowe raised it, is the award of colours.
It would appear to me that the awarding with colours, or the threat of withdrawal of colours, seems to be the big stick with which they keep equestrian sport in line, but not in line in a healthy way, in line in a way that I think I certainly know that the riding athletes are a little apathetic about sports admin and about rules and regulations. But if you threaten a rider with the withdrawal of, or the potential withdrawal of international participation, they jump into line and they will do absolutely anything. I noticed that what I perceived to be irregularities in the sport came in with the advent of Lotto. There were suddenly people arriving on committees that their presence was inexplicable. And what we've also noticed in the sport is large amounts of money have started to move around. For instance, South African show jumping last year processed 20 million rand in entry fees, just in entry fees for events. And that's only one of the equestrian disciplines. The sport has grown and spread, And with the movement of funds and the electronic systems of entry fee, I think it's possible for members of the sport to put a little scoop out and scoop the funds as they go past. And I noticed that the pressure on the sport grew as the amount of money in the sport grew.
So we get into money, which is often the root of all evil.
That and
so
sex,
you say that there's problems with the dealing with the money.
That and sex, money and sex. I'm kidding, but yes, money is the issue. And where I think that the sports structure has started to be compromised is at the points where the money moves or flows.
Either misappropriated, to use the polite word,
Misdirected,
or stolen,
yes.
or misdirected.
Yes.
Fancy trips to venues and all the rest of it. Tell me, I understand that you've been banned.
I have indeed.
Why is that? Or what's that all about?
Well, I called several issues into account and I circulated the council of the SAEF with my concerns.
The SADF?
SAEF, the South African Equestrian Federation
Council.
Council.
Yes.
And to make it really simple, I think that the South African Equestrian Federation Council is probably a little bit similar to President Zuma's cabinet. It just grew and grew and grew, and it got unmanageable and with disproportionate influences.
Unlike Zuma, they're not going with it.
No.
Yeah.
No.
So I don't understand it. Are you no longer a...
So all I'm allowed to be is a member. I'm not allowed to sit on committees any longer.
So they've taken your teeth away?
They certainly have.
Oh, I see. So now your basic criticism is twofold.
Yes.
It involves the way in which SASCOC is organised. Is that right?
It involves more the way in which SASCOC's influence is used. And so what is of enormous importance is this is a game that involves animal and speed. There are elements of danger, significant danger. A serious riding accident can be a serious thing. So one of the aspects is the danger. The other aspect is the humane treatment of horses. And these require really, really strict application of rules, and they require very important amounts of education. And I see that the sport is spreading and growing, but I see application of rules being neglected, and I see the application of safety standards being neglected.
And you give a warning how you say this, what the source of it is, that SASCOC is using a tool to try and to keep the members of the Federation in line with the threat that they will be expelled, and therefore that
yes,
the international connection will be lost.
Yes.
That's your complaint.
And really recently, so what happened when the sport got restructured, we were told that SASCOC required the restructure. I don't think the restructure came from SASCOC. My instincts are that the restructure came from Tony Lewis, who has had a long-standing relationship with Tubby Reddy. When the sport was restructured, it was, I would say that the number of officials administering the sport was multiplied by 4. Sort of parallel committees were created. There was a lot of, how can I say, confusion. And in that confusion, I think that money streams started to go in ways that were not appropriate.
What's your source for these possible threats by SASCOC? Because that's very important. Is there any writing, or what? It's just that your gut feel tells you that, or what?
May I just consult Mr. DeSantos quickly? I think he's still here. May I just ask Mr. DeSantos about that?
Yeah.
Clem, do we have anything?
Yeah, we received letters from SASCOC on the restructure. So the restructure...
And does that threaten withdrawal?
Correct, absolutely.
Just to put this onto the record, Mr. DeSantos has now interposed to say that these threats emanate from emails that have been received.
And not only emails, but also at public meetings with Mr. Mubarak Mohammed, who at those drawn.
Also, public meetings, this is quite a serious matter.
Yes.
The other complaint that you have, we've touched on that, is the way in which funds are being dealt with.
Yes.
And you say they're being misdealt with.
Yes. For instance, there is a schools league, and the schools league is probably 3 or 4 times bigger than the show jumping prize money, show jumping entry fee thing that I just told you about. So if show jumping processed 20 million rand last year in entry fees, the schools league probably processed about 3 times that.
What school is that?
This is the SANISA, the South African National Schools Association. And what I see happening there is entries are received and competitions are run, but I do not see any put back into the sport. Now, what is so ideal about probably other sports, but certainly ours, it's based on volunteerism. There's an amazing amount of people who do stuff for nothing. Moms and dads, instructors, boyfriends and girlfriends. But when there are people doing something for nothing, and yet there are charges being levied, the opportunity of profit grows significantly. Now, what I see is a thing like Schools League processing millions of rands worth of entries, but I do not see them returning anything in the way of training or anything in the way of development or growth of the sport. They are merely offering competition, and they offer no prize money, and they rely hugely on volunteerism. So it's a very profitable thing, such a thing as a schools league. And that is an area where I think there's a lot of danger. I think there's been a lot of quite serious falls at the schools because standards are not adhered to. And although they practice our equestrian sports, they are not answerable to us. They are answerable, from what I can tell, only to SASCOC. But SASCOC does not pitch up at school shows and see what's going on. And it really involves millions and millions of rands. Millions.
There's somebody you mentioned in your remission called Johan Kurtz. He's from South African tennis.
Yes.
Is he now in charge of SASCOC?
No, but when the restructuring happened, he was imposed upon SAEF as the president. And what happened, he has a daughter who has a riding school in Bella Bella, so he had a very small foot in the door, but we'd never seen him on committees. Normally when you see people in committees on equestrian sport, they start somewhere and you get to know them and they slowly work their ways up, and there's a familiarity. He arrived from the outside. We could not understand why he arrived and where he came from, and he certainly had no history in equestrian sport to suddenly be the president.
Has he taken over from Sam?
No, in fact his presidency, there was a really strong pushback in equestrian sport, and his presidency was rejected.
Whose presidency?
Kurtz.
Oh, so he's not the president anymore?
No.
I see.
And when we saw his, no, I withdraw that.
All right.
Could I just get some clarity
Yes,
on the monies raised from all of these sporting events that you
Yes.
referred us to? Is
And
that...
ma'am, before you answer the question, may I say I may well refer to Clem Santos. He's got a far better business brain about this than I do, but I'll do my best to answer what you ask.
So who, the 2 examples you gave of huge amounts of money being made from these events,
Yes.
who manages those events?
So I know, for instance, that South African show jumping manages those. It takes a rake-off of the entry fees, and the rake-off is used for things like administration, training of officials, and so on. You can go into SA Show Jumping and say, how much money have we got? Currently, I think we've got somewhere in the region of R1 million in the show jumping account. But that is obvious, evident. You can call on it, you can see it at any given day, and you can ask what they're going to do with it, and it's accountable. But show jumping is run by show jumping for show jumping. This is not the case with some of the other bodies. We don't know where the funds go, and we don't see a putback. I think we'd all shut up if we could say, oh, they built this, or they trained that, or they brought in such and such a coach from overseas, but we don't see that happening. I just see competitions being run.
Is any of that money filtered through to SASCOC?
No, I can't say.
So your complaint about the mismanagement, as it were, of funds
Yes.
is really by the jockeys, by the SA Show Jumping Association?
SA Show Jumping, I think, house is in order. It's the other disciplines of which I'm suspicious, particularly the schools league.
So,
Equestrian schools, yes.
and the equestrian school events are managed by who?
By SANISA, that's what it's called, but SANISA is accountable not to anybody in equestrian sport. From what I can tell, it is only affiliated to SASCOC. We have no say over SANISA, although it uses our officials, our facilities, our rules, but it's autonomous and uncontrolled and uncontrollable.
What does SANISA do?
They run schools leagues competition, and what their very, very clever marketing strategy is, they dole out colors. Now, from what I can see currently with parents, the idea is to get as many colors as possible which go towards honors blazers, which go towards bursary applications, and so on. It's a very effective marketing tool for the business of the school's equestrian sport.
Just in terms of your own knowledge about the monies raised by them, is that something you have first-hand knowledge about?
Yes.
You do?
Yes.
And you have a hunch that the monies are being used for purposes not intended or for purposes outside of the sport?
The money is not returning to the sport.
Okay.
So just to raise something, I see mention of someone who's here, Shelley Bessinger. What's her role in the equestrian
So
field?
Shelley Bessinger's been in, she's sitting there in the front row, and she's been in equestrian sport almost all her life, and latterly in an administrative position. She came from KwaZulu-Natal, came to Gauteng, then she ran the Kyalami Park Club, which was the biggest club. She was, Shelley, I think, Secretary General.
It would be useful for us to hear what she's got to say.
Shelley has a wonderful length of time in the sport and a very strong overview, and her bias would be towards the administrative overview and finances.
Excellent. All right, we'll hopefully get to her after tea.
Thank
but
you, sir.
first, Dr. Bacher.
Just for your information, I know Jan Kurtz, he was president of SA Tennis for about 6-7 years.
Yes.
Or then he's out, so now he came to your discipline,
Yes.
and he's out there again. One of our objectives, well, instructions is to try and evaluate, is there financial mismanagement within SASCOC or the disciplines? They're in writing. You mentioned a figure of 20 million rand.
I did.
Right. Which discipline was that from?
South African show jumping last year processed 20 million rands worth of entry fees.
Yeah. Are you aware whether it's audited, external auditors?
Yes. I think South African show jumping's house is in order currently.
So that
And probably always has been.
Thank you.
The mismanagement began when SANEF, the South African National Equestrian Federation, which controlled equestrian sport prior to South African Equestrian Federation, which was imposed by SASCOC, under the presidency of Tony Lewis, we went from a positive balance sheet to a negative balance sheet in a fairly short period of time.
Who would have the accounts of the Equestrian Federation?
May I ask Shelley Beck-Bessinger?
She would know.
Yes,
Well,
very
we'll
much.
ask her. All right, thank you very much for your input.
Thank you, sir.
I interviewed Pierce Sprague, which obviously would
Yeah.
listen to those.
I think we'll take the adjournment now. Hopefully they've organised tea for you, although I assume so. I never know with these catering arrangements. I presume it's here. So we'll adjourn for, say, 15 minutes to about 11:45, and if you then come back to that. The tea is on the house.
Thank you.
What do you want to do?
No, I thought it'd be just a joke. I've interviewed Pierce Sprague, the famous jockey.
Yeah.
So I thought it was a joke. He said, listen, by the way, have you watched? No, it's finished now, thank God. I thought it was just be like,
Judge, we need to partner these together. Yeah, so the SABC can carry the feet because they kind of like missing it.
so can you want to strap it up or
So I
what?
just want to strap it up, yeah.
Okay,
I can have my
are you SABC?
No, he's technical guy. SABC is there.
Just, he's in charge.
Yeah, okay, just wrap this together.
We're in the 20. I can wash one color. Shirley Beckman Singer. Then I wear in our paper.
Gala. Oh. Oh, yeah, Brenda.
All right. You want to get everybody here. Where is Dr. Bucket?
So I want you, when you speak, to put the two together.
Okay.
Are we okay?
Yeah.
Okay, it's mounted. Okay, there's one. Then there's several here, there, and
Okay.
then, you know.
Where is our recording?
No, they're not ready yet.
Right. Right, this is the resumed hearing of the committee. Anybody who hasn't filled in this attendance register, please do so. Anybody who hasn't filled it in, you all filled it in. Excellent. Right. The next person, it's not Miss Messenger. Who have we got?
Yes.
It is, okay. Is it Miss or Mrs.?
It's Mrs.
Miss. Right, would you mind standing up, please? A moment. What is your full name?
Michelle Sharon Beck Bessinger.
Do you have any objection to taking the oath?
Not at all.
Do you swear that the evidence that you're about to give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
So help
Raise
me
your
God.
right hand, so help me God. Thank you. You may be seated if you like. We've got a written submission from you. Where did I put it? Yeah. What is your position with the Equestrian Society or Association?
I'm the managing director of a body called the Council of Equine and Equestrian Professionals of South Africa.
So in short, is that the Equestrian Society?
No.
No, it's something else.
It's an external body. It's a non-profit company, and we are registered with the South African Qualifications Authority, SACQA, as a professional body in terms of the National Qualification Framework Act.
You know, you've heard talk from people today who were talking about horses, horse racing and the like. What is their position as far as you're concerned?
Our professional body is a body that actually looks after the entire industry, the equine and equestrian industry. There are 66, we have identified over 66 career paths that cover from racing to sport, to tourism, to mounted policing, to metro policing, to veterinary. So it's actually encompasses the entire industry rather than just the sport, which is covered by SASCOC and the South African Equestrian Federation.
And if you heard Mr. Askin give evidence, and he says that the whole organization is in disarray because of what SASCOC has done. Is that correct?
That is correct. If I may first just give you our submission as far as SABC is concerned, and then I would very gladly embellish on both of what him and Mr. Dos Santos have said.
Yes.
I'd just like to explain what a professional body is. Firstly, as I say, it is a body that is mandated by the South African Qualification Authority, and we have been given 2 designations to which we can give to our members. The first designation is that of an equine practitioner, and the definition of that is somebody who earns some or part of their money working with horses. The second designation is an equestrian practitioner, which is somebody who earns some or part of their money or income riding, and it would fall in there, of teaching riding of horses. So in this space, we have been given the role of the development quality partner with SACWA to write the qualifications for coaches. These qualifications are pegged at NQF levels 5, 6, and 7. The qualification of the coach that we have written doesn't only deal with sport coaches. It deals with coaching of horse riding, as I say, across the board, mounted policing, the SA Defence Force, etc. So it's a very wide, it's a much wider and holistic space that we operate in. Our specific problem is that SASCOC, during our recognition came through in November 2015, SASCOC applied for recognition with SACWA as a professional body. Firstly, this is not proper in terms of its mandate because it doesn't have individual members. Its members are the 72 federations. It also was very clear that its space was high performance sport only, and at the time of its submission it said that it said in writing that there was no other body in the same space that it was going to be operating in. Further confusions come in because SASCOC has now announced that they have another body, a professional body called CASA, the Coaches Association of South Africa. They have done this in writing as well as in a verbal presentation that they did at SASCOC House in June last year. And they have intimated that this is going to be the only body and only pathway in which coaches are going to be recognized, including equestrian coaches. I must just point out at this point, and I think that you have also gathered, that when you are coaching with equestrian in mind, you're teaching an athlete, a human athlete, you're teaching an animal athlete, and you're teaching a horse and rider combination. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. You can't just be a coach, a generic coach. It's incredibly specialized. At this meeting, as I say, in June last year, where the Equestrian Federation and its members were invited, CASA then they announced this body called, SASCOC announced this body called CASA, the Coaches Association of South Africa, and that they would be doing what we call recognition of prior learning, RPL, for coaches. And the question that we were asking is, firstly, against what qualifications they're going to be RPLing. Where in their constitution does it allow for them to form this association? This association, we have looked and has no legal standing. It is not registered with SACWA. And however, they are collecting funds from individual coaches, not just equestrian coaches, which is going into the SASCOC bank account. So by them saying this, we honestly believe that SASCOC are misrepresenting their role within the space. They also have, as I say, that basically said to coaches, and I think Mr. Aston has hit on the big stick approach, with equestrians are almost numb now with this big stick, that unless SASCOC says you jump, that they have to follow this route. So this has created a huge amount of uncertainty and confusion within the equestrian coaching space. And that's our submission.
Who have you been dealing with at SASCOC?
We have spoken to, when we originally asked for this meeting to be postponed, because we wanted to be able to sit down and discuss this, I contacted Tabi Reddy and copied Desiree Varden, because it's apparently this is her baby, as it were, her project. And that is who I was discussing with. And Mr. Reddy basically came back and said they're just going ahead. You know, they're not really interested in our story. So, and he did this in writing, yeah.
We know that Reddy has been dismissed from SASCOC. Have you dealt with anybody else after him?
No, we have, Mrs. Varden was part of the, as I say, she was copied in to ask if we could try and reach some kind of consensus. We are seeking every kind of recourse that we can. We are trying to engage, but in the meantime, until such time that we can sit and engage with them, they are continually pushing and promoting CASA.
I see on the attendance register, I think she might have been sitting next to you, Louise Dirk, I can't pronounce it.
Van Dirkheim Voitus.
Yeah, what is her role in?
She's my colleague and she's my eyes today. As I'm sure you've gathered, I'm visually impaired, and Louisa is my fellow board member.
So, do we need to talk to her? Can she add anything that you...
Well, hopefully, I did ask, because I haven't been able to refer to notes, if I could just ask her if I have left anything out.
Is she here? Where is she? Hi. Anything if you hear anything that you want to add to, please let us know. But we're not quite finished with this lady.
Thank you.
Right. Anything else you want to highlight in your evidence? Ms. Beggins?
No, sir, I think that this is...
Essentially, your complaint is against SASCOC.
Correct.
They haven't followed the correct procedures.
Correct.
And they, in fact, have followed the wrong procedures.
And in our opinion, are misrepresenting their position within the coaching space, the equestrian coaching space.
I mean, the importance of SASCOC, the way I understand it, is the international connection.
Correct.
And that's where you are very interested, obviously.
So our interest is from fundamental. As I said, we are looking at the sport as holistically, as well as the whole industry, covering everybody from grooms right at the bottom level to people who are coaching at the highest level. We're looking at the whole industry in its entirety.
You heard the evidence, I think, of the journalist, Ms. Lowe, and her basic complaint was in regard to colours for the horse racing industry. Do you have any comment on that?
I was actually the Secretary General of the Federation at the time that they first applied for colours, and I know that it was basically through my intercession in the first place that they got that they were reinstated for the period that they got their colours. But I know that the whole history of the Federation, again, if I may, and I can just to confirm, I was Acting Secretary General and then Secretary General of the South African South African National Equestrian Federation, which was a body under the South African Equestrian Council. And we managed all of the Olympic sports, and basically at the time were the National Federation. We were then told by Mr. Mubarak Mohammed as well as by Tabi Reddy that we had to amalgamate, and we had to form a body above us called the South African Equestrian Federation, which would then include, and it is actually now 18 or 19 different equestrian sporting codes. So we were forced to disband. The disciplines were forced to be standalone and to all form under one umbrella. I can confirm what both Mr. Dos Santos and Mr. Askin have said, in that we had several meetings where we just tried to put our case forward and say it cannot work. We cannot put lumped together. The dynamics are completely different, and each time we were threatened either with, we were basically told if we don't like it then we must go, and they will replace us with somebody else. And then as individual members, I actually shortly afterwards was elected onto the South African Equestrian Federation as the Vice President, and we were basically threatened that if we stepped out of line, SASCOC says, and if we sue or get legal opinion, we will be suspended. And that was the whole stick that's been over the equestrian sporting, the fraternity since 2010. So yes, I can confirm it is absolute shambles. They've had 8 now presidents in a space of 5 years. They've had 4 constitutions, and basically it has been driven by SASCOC, and SASCOC have not wanted to understand. It's SASCOC's way or the highway.
You heard what Mr. Askin had to say about the application of funds, something like 20 million rand, he suggests or says has been misapplied or wrongly applied. Do you have any comment on that?
I don't think Mr. Askin actually was saying that all of that has been misused. I think what he was saying is that that's the turnover of the show jumping body, but we know that with the schools league it is a lot more than that. We know that the South African Equestrian Federation's funds at the moment, their finances, they have had a qualified audit for the last 3 years. In fact, the auditors refused to sign off the last lot of the financials. And unfortunately, when you have changes of committees, I resigned, and if I hadn't resigned, I would have been suspended, as Mr. Aston is, because I also stood up and said this is not okay. But the bottom line is, because of the structure that has been imposed on the Federation by SASCOC, it is allowed for no corporate governance, very little transparency, and a lot of dissent.
Tell me, on that note, are there audited accounts for your organisation?
Yes.
Who has them?
For SEPSA? Yes, yes, I do.
You have them?
Yeah.
Would you have any objection to making them available to the committee?
Not at all.
You obviously don't have them here.
No, I don't, sir, but
So
I'm happy to send them.
perhaps if you could send them to Mr. Bossoff, the
Will do.
secretary. I think you've got his particulars
Correct.
of the accounts. That would be quite useful.
We can send ours for the last 2 years.
Yes.
And I have been working on a voluntary capacity, so that all the funds coming in, so that we've been able to use those funds to be able to write the qualification. So the money from our body has been plowed straight back in to writing this qualification.
Yes. Thank you. I'm going to ask my co-member if he has anything to ask you.
Mrs. Bessinger, when did you communicate with SASCOC about the CASA issue?
We first became aware of the CASA issue a couple of days before they had called the meeting. And this was the 18th of June.
This is last year sometime,
yes.
more or less
Yes.
June sometime.
Yeah. I then contacted SASCOC immediately, so it was like 2 or 3 days before. I have the correspondence, I have the answer back from Mr. Reddy. I'm very happy to make those available to you.
And a meeting, as I understand it, subsequently took place?
Correct. It took place at SASCOC House. Mrs. Varden did the presentation. Mrs. Azira, sorry, I can't think of her surname. We actually got a written transcript. We did a transcript of the meeting, and we've had it transposed into a written, which I'm happy to make available to you. Stood up and said SASCOC is not just involved in high performance. Its mandate is all sport, which we believe is also a little confusing. But I contacted him twice before that meeting, and as I say, I'm happy to make both the transcript as well as those emails available to you.
Please, if you could. Could I just ask you about SEPSA? Just from a coaching point of view, what are your figures of the demographics of coaching in?
So coaching at the moment in South Africa, we have approximately 250 fully qualified coaches sitting at NQF level 6, mostly white female. We only at this stage have got one black male who is an assistant instructor, and one coloured lady who is a full coach. And this is one of the things that we're really concerned with CASA, because it appears as if, and please, I can only go on what came out of that meeting. It appears as if the space that they want to work and pin these qualifications is within the higher education framework. We're not sure, and we would like to know, because unfortunately we cannot find any information about it. And this will be a huge barrier. We have serious concerns about that, because we know for a fact that, and our history has told us that equestrians are not academics. In the whole, they in fact, the framework that we fall under is the Further Vocation and Education Framework, FVET, with the Quality Councils of Trades and Occupations, because it is not for higher education. And we are so concerned with CASA's, if that is their vision, that they are going to create a huge barrier to anybody coming through who has not and is not an academic.
So just from the outcome of the meeting with SASCOC, did they effectively tell you that irrespective of the impact on your organization, they would be establishing CASA?
Yes. The bottom line is that they would be prepared to talk to us, but you know, they're going ahead and they're carrying on. We have approached SACWA and asked them to please try and help us mediate, because there is this overlap. Unfortunately, I think because of SASCOC's current position, I don't think much will happen within the near future. And that is concerning for us because, you know, our coaches don't know what to do, they don't know where they need to be going. They've been told that all coaches need to be licensed by 2020 and that SASCOC will be giving the license. We know for a fact that there has to be an Act of Parliament promulgated before that happens. So I think half the story is coming out, and the big stick.
Well, just in terms of the submissions made, there is another person who's indicated that SASCOC actually passed a resolution to amend its constitution, and that efforts were being made to amend the Act to increase SASCOC's areas of governance. Are you aware of that?
I am aware of that, and that what has to happen first is that has to happen. But to be collecting money from coaches now for a body called CASA, which we would like to know what its legal standing is, and that the Act has not changed, we believe is misrepresentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Bacher?
Just one question. You mentioned that past 12 months the financials were not approved by the external auditors. Is that correct?
Of the Federation.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what's happened subsequent to that?
They've had a new, remember now that I have resigned, so I'm not on the committee anymore. However, I have seen an email that's been sent out by the new financial person to say that they are trying to reconsolidate, and that the fees have gone up, I think, almost 60% to try and cover the shortfalls, but I can't tell you.
Is there any suggestion of mismanagement or of that nature? You're hesitating.
I am hesitating.
Okay, we'll leave it like that.
Yes.
Who is this new person that you mentioned?
Who is the new financial person? A person called Mr. Neil Smith. I'm not sure if it's the same Mr. Neil Smith that has been referred to previously, but he does have an impeccable record of managing. He actually was our financial person when we were still the South African National Equestrian Federation. So I have every faith that he will manage them and try and sort them out.
Has he got white hair?
It's another.
Okay. Is there anything your Assistant Louise would like to add?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Excused. Where do we go from here?
Judge, we're going to deal with Mrs. Lane here. Mrs. Lane.
Mrs. Lane.
Yeah.
Oh, we've just got documents.
Oh, this is the athletics story. Yeah. Okay.
She's not feeling well and
All
she's
right.
got an earlier flight.
Okay. Mrs. Lane, is it Mrs. or
Mrs.
Miss Lane? Would you please just state your full name, please?
Lorraine Daphne Lane.
Do you have any objection to taking the oath?
Not at all.
Would you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear that the evidence you're about to give before this committee is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Say so, help me God. Thank you. You may be seated if you like, or whatever. Right. We've now received some documents concerning your participation. You're involved in athletics, is it right?
I was.
Was.
I was
Yeah.
a former
board member for 9 years. I wonder if I may give a bit of my background. I think it's pertinent.
Yes.
Okay. I worked in the field of athletics for more than 33 years. Between 1976 and 1985, I coached disadvantaged athletes and middle and long distance runners at the Wanderers Club. I provided equipment at my own expense, financially assisted many, and bailed several athletes out of jail. A number of athletes stayed at my home during the school uprising. I obtained sponsored education for athletes at private schools and found sports scholarships for others who subsequently graduated from American universities. During the 1980s and early 90s, I provided John Holt, General Secretary of the IAAF, with information regarding the impact of the political situation on athletics. From 1985 to 1992, I was a middle and long distance coach at the University of Witwatersrand. Both my coaching positions were unpaid. During this time, I worked closely with activist Bill Jardine. Between 1988 and 1996, I was a member of the SA Sports Congress and the Transvaal Amateur Athletics Congress. I was integrally involved in the process of transformation and the founding of Athletics South Africa. In 1992, I was appointed as NOXA then, or SASCOC selector for the Barcelona Olympic Games. For many years, I served as a national track and field selector and convener of selectors, as well as a road running commission member and selector. I served on the Central Gauteng Board and managed provincial and 9 international athletics teams. For 20 years, I competed in the marathon and shorter road races. I provided free psychological, relationship, and even access to dental assistance to athletes in need. The only payment or reimbursement I received in 33 years was 900 Rand a month as a member of the Athletics South Africa board. I'm sorry, my voice is back.
Well done. Among the papers that you've handed up is a judgment by the learned Judge Wright.
Yes.
I've had an opportunity to look through it, and it seems to me that what the learned judge dealt with was an application which you had brought against SASCOC and the Athletics Federation.
That's correct, sir.
And
Could
what the learned judge then found was that your dismissal by SASCOC was unlawful or wrong, and he set it aside.
That's correct. Can I just give you the events leading up to that, because I think they're most pertinent, and especially because I don't believe that the truth about what actually happened to Caster Semenya has ever been told.
So are you now reinstated as a member of the Athletics?
No, I'm not.
Why
I'm
not?
still suspended because they won the appeal.
I'm sorry, they noted an appeal against Judge.
They launched an appeal against that. ASA did not launch an appeal. Only SASCOC launched an appeal, and they had four advocates, 3 of whom were SCs, and the appeal, the court-of-quo judgment was overturned.
Oh, it was overturned?
Yes.
Where's that judgment? Who gave that?
It is, I don't have it, I'm afraid, but I can get it for you.
Can you get it, and would you please give it to a copy to Mr. Bossel?
Well, this gentleman is...
So, what you've given us is the judgment of Judge Wright. The effect of it was their decision to suspend you on the 4th of November was set aside or reviewed, and it was declared that you were entitled to participate.
That is correct.
You in fact didn't participate because SASCOC noted an appeal.
That's correct.
And the appeal judges, whoever they were there 2 of them or 3 of them?
I think there were 4 as far as I remember.
Four, no, it would be
Well,
three.
Then it must have been
Three. It appealed to the full bench of the provincial division, Gauteng division.
Please, sir, may I just read the events leading up to that? Because I think without it, it's impossible
Yes,
to talk
certainly.
about the court case. On the 6th of August 2009, I was asked by Dr. Harold Adams to provide supportive counselling to Castor Semenya, who was leaving for Berlin the following day. He told me that the IAAF were questioning Miss Semenya's gender after a run of 156.72 at the African Junior Championships in Mauritius.
In a word, did you take a line in support of Castor Semenya?
Yes, I took a line because as far as I'm concerned, she's a legal woman.
Yes.
She was born, she has a legal identity as a female.
So that was the issue that you were concerned with, her identity as a woman. Subsequently, if I remember the facts of the matter,
I don't think
she
the
was
facts
recognized
were
as a woman.
Yes, I don't think they were totally correct, though. Dr. Adams
But
was...
it's now history. She was recognized as a woman.
She has been, but the IAAF are still trying to change that through the...
Anyway, we're not here to inquire about Castor Semenya, but I understand that she's now competing in events and so on.
I'm not really talking about her, I'm talking about my issues that led to me
That's why you were suspended.
Yeah.
But all of it is going to be
Dr.
raised.
Adams is and was a member of the IAAF Medical Commission.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it seems to me that this is all going to be aired by SASCOC. They're going to produce this appeal judgment which answers the judgment of Judge Wright. Am I wrong? They're going to say that, in effect, they rightfully dismissed you. Have you read the appeal judgment?
Yes, I've read it.
Have I summarized it correctly? I've never seen it. But is that the effect
The
of it?
appeal judgment dealt on the procedural issues of the case. It didn't dismiss the actual facts of the case.
But it dismissed, set aside the finding of Judge Wright that you be reinstated.
Yes, it did.
That's the nub of the matter. So as far as SASCOC is concerned, I would assume, they say they've wrongly suspended you, wrongly proceeded you, or whatever. That's the end of the matter.
I think it's very important. This is my first chance to be heard, and I would be very grateful if you allowed me to say.
Yes, certainly, but I understood, and I must be
I think you're getting
frank
right
with
to
you.
the-
Wait a minute, let me finish, please. I have read through what Judge Wright said, and he has summarized your position. Is his judgment correct as far as you're concerned?
Yes.
So we can read what he has to say, and obviously we need to know what the appeal court has to say about it.
Obviously, that is something that SASCOC will probably present. But what I would like to actually share with the court
Yes.
is my years of frustration when I was stonewalled, when I was told by Gideon Sam that I would be facing a disciplinary, and how many communications between us were totally ignored. I also went to the Human Rights Commission. I went to the Jacob Zuma's hotline. I went to the Department of Sport. I went to a labor law expert. I went to every possible resource I could to try and deal with the matter internally. Because if you look at SASCOC's constitution, it says that you're not entitled to go to court, that you actually have to try and deal with things internally. My attorney also approached SASCOC's lawyers and asked if the whole issue could be arbitrated, and they responded that it wasn't an arbitral matter. So I was denied arbitration. So from 2009 to late in 2013, I was left in an absolute state of limbo. I was pilloried in the media. SASCOC said they were going to put us in jail. I was exonerated by not only Mrs. Winnie Madikizela's task team, that was going to be Castor Semenya task team. I was exonerated by the financial audit of ASA. I was also exonerated by Advocate Orenser in his judgment of Lenny Chweni, as were the other board members. I'm not alone. It was the whole board that was involved. And I never got one response from Gideon Sam or SASCOC after they advised me in January 2010 that I would be facing a disciplinary hearing. So they left me in a no man's land. They advised me I could not stand for office, I could not play or get involved in the sport myself, I couldn't coach, I couldn't even contact any athletes during this time. And they refused to answer every one of my mails. They refused to give the correspondence that was requested to the Department of Sport, to the Public Protector's Office, to the Human Rights Commission. They asked for correspondence.
I've not been able to find amongst the papers that were handed to us earlier a reference to the judgment on appeal. It was an appeal of the Supreme Court of Appeal, and it was in case number 1016 of 2013.
That's correct.
So we need to have that. Obviously it would be much easier if you were to send a copy, if you have it, to Mr. Bossoff. But obviously if you haven't got it, we could get it from the court records. But
I will get it from my attorney, that's not a problem.
Perhaps he could send it to Mr. Bossoff.
But I think the issue here is that I was tried in the media, as were the other board members.
Yes.
There's an issue there which I brought up, where Gideon Sam was chairman and director of Inside Sport. And so he was benefiting at that time from that business relationship.
I can assure you that we intend to hear from Mr. Sam, whether he likes it or not. We will subpoena him, but he obviously is the man in charge of SASCOC. Is that correct?
He is. Also, to go a bit further than that, there were other issues, like in 2010, SASCOC administrators took hold of the Lotto Distribution Committee. Gideon Sam was the chairperson of the Distribution Committee. Hajira Kaji was the vice chairperson. Ray Marley, another administrator, was also on the committee, as were Dr. Harold Adams, who was an associate, and Matlatsi Kikabela. She was suspended from the ANC board because of fraud in her province, and then she was put onto the Lotto Distribution Committee, and thereafter became a board member of SASCOC. So there was a great deal of conflict of interests and multiple roles played in this issue. I was also told by Benelli Sandani, who was tragically murdered 2 years ago, that Hajiri Kaji is a relation of Sedgars owners. I think they're the Dockrats. Sedgars supply SASCOC with their uniforms and kits in which they take part overseas. If you remember, in the Beijing Olympics, the athletes refused to wear it because it was so ugly, and several times there have been outcries as to the ill-fitting, unattractive wear that is produced by setbacks. So these administrators, they had multiple roles. We were, as Athletics South Africa, we were coerced to use Accelerate Inside Sport as our marketing agents. We didn't have a choice.
I see in a quick reference to the papers, and I must confess I have not had an opportunity to read them in any detail. They were given to us a short while ago. A mention of a Mr. Chuni, if I pronounce it correctly.
Mr. Leonard Chweni, who was president.
What's his role in this?
His role was that he was the head of ASA, and he was with the team management in Berlin when Castor ran in 2009. And when he came back, after a year, he had to face a disciplinary inquiry launched by SASCOC, as well as 2 other members of the board. And the rest of the board members, as I said, were left in this limbo waiting for their disciplinaries to occur.
So what happened to him? Was he dismissed as well?
He had resigned, as far as I know. I don't know. I have had no contact with him since before the day we were suspended, basically.
But he's not there anymore?
No, he was basically, I think he was suspended for 3 or 5 years. But I must say, which is of utmost importance, that Castor had to run in Berlin. If she hadn't run, she would have lost her sponsorship, her scholarship to Pretoria University, and she might have had to return to her village in Limpopo, and she would never have had access to the extraordinary life she has lived since then, and the ability and opportunity to display her extraordinary gifts and talent. So as far as I'm concerned, she wanted to run. We were told that when she was told by Dr. Adams that he would bandage part of her body so she could actually drop out and pretend she was injured, she said, no, I'm going to run. She had told Madiba, she had a meeting with him before she left, and she had told him she was going to go, she was going to win a medal for him. So we know what happened in Berlin, and the most important thing that you haven't allowed me to highlight was when I got to her residence in Pretoria and tried to see what the situation was before I attempted any counseling. She made it palpably clear that she hadn't signed any informed consent. And as Dr. Bacher will confirm, anyone going into anything like gender testing has got to sign an informed consent to the testing. She had no idea what was going to happen to her. She told me she was going to have drug tests, and therefore no counseling could possibly take place. And I advised Dr. Adams of this immediately after I left him. And he said, don't worry, I will handle it. But when I spoke to the team when they returned, they told me that she had never, he traveled with her to Berlin, and he never told her about anything, any of the implications that were going to happen about the tests. I must say that Ms. Dikazela Mandela at the Castor Semenya task team, she exploded. She said, who is this doctor? As you may know, Mrs. Mandela is a social worker. She said, in terms of cultural sensitivity, her family should have been informed. Her family should have been consulted. She was an 18-year-old girl, and none of that occurred. And nobody has ever allowed me to describe what actually happened on that day and how amazing she is. I absolutely admire her talent and her running, but nobody has given her credit for her unbelievable resilience and her amazing personality, that as an 18-year-old, she could go out and be pilloried by the IAAF. You know, I must say that when I was working with John Holt, he told me the IAAF, they allowed many drug cheats off the hook. And the problem about that is that when they allowed them to retire, as they did, they left their records intact. So people now still have to try and achieve the records of those people. He even told me how it was done. He told me that they inserted fountain pen bladders of urine inside them when they had to go for drug tests. One of them was Florence Griffith Joyner, and he shared this with me. Now, I knowingly went to Castor, who has nothing but natural talent, has never seen a pill or drug in her life, and yet the IAAF afford drug cheats the most incredible respect and confidentiality. And Castor, as an 18-year-old, suddenly had splurged over every newspaper in the world the most personal details about her, which is absolutely diabolical.
Can I just summarize this? Are you laying the complaint with the complaint that's was made against Semenya at the door of SASCOC?
No.
Were they complicit in that? That's what we're investigating.
They were complicit later when the IAAF said they were going to do gender testing on Castor. It took them almost a year to
Is this
find
SASCOC?
Yes, I'm trying
That's what
to
we're
say that.
investigating.
Okay. When the IAAF decided they would do full investigative tests, which includes a huge panel of medical professionals and psychologists, it took them a year to find out that she was a female. And they said Castor could run in the interim. SASCOC stopped Castor from running for that entire year. So yes, it does involve them, absolutely.
Just something as an aside, I hope it's of no importance. Do you know Mr. Monty Hacker?
Very well, yes.
He is my only knowledge of athletics. I've never spoken to him about any of this. He's not involved in it anymore, is he?
He was, his legal firm acted for SASCOC.
Yeah.
When I was suspended, I approached him for his advice, and he said he'd spoken to Gideon Sam, so although he was one of my oldest friends, he couldn't represent me.
So he was conflicted, is it?
He was conflicted. So I persevered on my own until I saw Advocate Kassim, and Advocate Kassim said, please just go every internal route possible because it's far too expensive. Now I think my whole issue, I've documented what it cost SASCOC. This court case cost SASCOC. It was at least R1.5 million, because I had one advocate, they had 3 advocates who were SCs and a 4th advocate. And it was an unequal contest. They talk about level playing fields, but when it comes to legal issues, there is nothing like a level playing field. I had no access to anything but my personal savings. They have access to governmental, lotto, public funds, my own taxes paid for this. And so I was outgunned. I do not feel that my representation could ever have defeated the amount of artillery. And to make it even worse, I put in the charges. The appeal court allowed for the cost of 2 advocates, and SASCOC charged for 4. Their bill of costs for the appeal was around 900,000 rand. And it was taxed down to just over 200,000 rand. So the taxing was over 600 and about 60,000 rand.
I see that Judge Wright ordered SASCOC and the Athletics Federation to pay your costs jointly and separately on the attorney and client scale.
They never paid anything.
Well, they took it on appeal.
And the issue was that ASA had not joined willingly. They were under the administration of Zola Majavu, who was an administrator placed in ASA by SASCOC.
Well, they never raised that as far as I can see in the matter before Judge Wright. I don't know what they did on appeal, as I've said repeatedly. I've never seen the appeal judgment.
Well, the issue, I think, is that when the court case, the court of quo judgment came through, ASA completely accepted it, and they had absolutely no desire to go into any appeal.
The Court of Appeal, that was in their favour.
But ASA withdrew. They didn't appeal. Only SASCOC appealed the court of quo judgment.
Yes. Well, there's no doubt they were satisfied with it. Is there anything else you want to add or highlight?
I think that it is imperative that there is some kind of assistance to people who are individuals and who have a case, as I do, because you have seen the list of the attempts of what I went through to try and get a response from SASCOC and get some kind of clarification. Judge Wright mentioned in his judgment, Mero Muta, that this could have been sorted out in a meeting. And I think you would agree with that. I think it shows appalling corporate judgment, that there is no principled administration in SASCOC. It seems like this developed into a personal issue, and I can go into that as well, because our board was always in conflict with SASCOC because of their lip service to transformation, but their total lack of transformation. And that is also apparent in the portfolio committees of sport that were attended, and also my meeting with the Deputy Minister of Sport, who I attended with Mr. Tweni. All of those issues, Mr. Tweni left the Transformation Committee because he said he was being used as a rubber stamp. And he was appalled by the amounts of monies paid to people who sat on committees. In those days, 2008, he told me people were getting 10,000 Rand per committee meeting. And he was appalled when we were getting 900 Rand a month, which I was quite happy to accept. So I feel, yes, I'd like to say that in my experience, the administration of SASCOC at that stage and subsequently, the ones that I know are there, are bullies. I don't believe they have any respect for the federations. I seem to have been hearing that now, that they don't realize that each federation has its own expertise. As a selector, we used to select teams, and suddenly people would be removed from those teams. There was never any motivation, and it wasn't anything to do with transformation, because ASA was a leader in transformation in sport. But the issue is they have acted as laws unto themselves, and I think because they were protected by the IOC moratorium, they kept repeating it. If we try and investigate SASCOC, then the IOC will suspend athletes and not allow them to compete, and suspend the local Olympic body. That was even told to Mr. Sebulekwa, who is at the Public Protector's Office, who tried to get some kind of response to my case.
Thank you. I'm going to ask my co-member.
I don't have any questions.
She has no question. Dr. Bacher.
Right. You made, and he said the following: Gideon Sam, a beneficiary from Inside Sport, and they are the marketing agent of SASCOC. What do you mean by that? You
I didn't say that they were marking, they the biggest, were the biggest.
No, you said, so listen
Yes.
to me, I wrote down that he benefited from inside sport. What do you
Yes.
mean by that?
The name of Accelerate, the alternative name is Insight. I've handed in a document that shows you that Gideon Sam's name is on the letterhead as chairman and director of Accelerate Insight Sport. That's the alternative name, Accelerate Insight Sport.
Have you got a copy of that?
I've given it to you. I sent it to Mr. Bossel.
Can you send it to me, please? Do you know whether he financially benefited from that association?
I assume so because SASCOC were the people.
No, you mustn't
who-
assume, yes or no.
I don't know because I don't have any
But he's
details.
definitely on the letterhead.
He's on the letterhead.
Okay, thank you.
And there's another letter that I've handed in from James Evans, who was president of ASA, where he deliberately says at the bottom that Mr. Gideon Sam, you know, it's a letter to Mr. Sam, you know that you personally benefit from this.
Have you got
It's
that
in the
letter?
doc, I've just handed it to Mr. Bosch.
Will you send that to me? Thank you. Next point. In trying to help disadvantaged sport, a lot of the lottery money, big sums, hundreds of millions of rands, went out for good causes, theoretically. And you made the point, and I'm aware of it, that in that distribution committee, Gideon Sam was chairperson. Hajira, I know she was on that committee.
She was vice chairman.
Ray Marley. Is that still the situation? Because surely that's got to be...
No, that's not. That was 2010
Has that been stopped?
onwards. I have no idea. I don't know. I gave the
Good.
actual... I actually wrote to the
now,
Lotto district.
you don't
You have
know.
it in your pack.
But the other sports, millions of other sports, and here you have the main people from SASCOC on this big fund to distribute money.
That's the way it was in
I know,
from
aware of that.
2010
Can you
onwards.
find out if that's still the situation?
I can't
Because
tell
that
you. I'm
can't-
sorry, Dr.
That can't
Belford.
be right. Can't be right.
No, I don't. I think they have a 5-year term,
See what's happened
but
now.
I could be under correction.
All right. I interviewed Costa Semenya.
I saw that. It
You
was
saw the
a
program,
wonderful.
and I spent a whole hour and a half on her own, and she opened up to me. You're right. What happened there before the 2009 World Championship in Berlin? In Pretoria, the local body, they said to her, "We're going to take blood from you," and she assumed it was for doping.
Absolutely.
She was only 18.
18.
The same thing happened when she went to Berlin. Before a semi-final or final, she was rushed to a
Had to have a
depot, blood taken, and nobody said to her what the reason was. She
You are
assumed
so correct.
it was doping.
And
But that was all for
I must
gender.
just say that your
No,
interview
don't worry
was
about it. But what I would say is,
exceptionally good.
I think you're wrong, is that she's a very strong-willed woman. Hey, she got suspended. And she's come out of it so strong because I don't believe in South Africa she hasn't got 100% support. And you made the point that, you know, she's come out of the flying colours, and to the credit of the South African community, they've all supported her.
I totally agree. But internationally, she
Yeah.
still hasn't had that. And the IAAF, she still isn't sure whether she's going to be able to run. I know her coach, Jean Verster, very well. And she's still aware that the IAAF are trying to have...
But the
her
two main
distribute.
things about the letterhead, you know, as an Olympic body to be on the letterhead of a marketing company, and the other point is, I'm aware of it. This big fund, the lottery fund, the Olympic people were on distributing the money.
Can
I
I
just want to
just-
know whether that's still the situation.
Yes, I'm sorry, but I just need to
No, we'll
say...
find out, we'll find out.
But what I'd like to add is the local body ASA had absolutely no ability to have any kind of gender tests because they could never put together the whole group of people, including psychologists and gynecologists and genealogists and you name it. to try and do this. They didn't even have a form that discussed gender testing. The only people who do gender testing is the IAAF. And Zola Budd was tested when she went to the UK. She was never tested here. She actually had to undergo gender tests when she arrived there.
Thank you.
Just, I think my co-member's got one question.
Mrs. Lane, you said earlier that Hajira Kaji is related to Sedgars. Do you know what the relation is?
No. Benelli Sindani was the CEO of SASCOC. And when he resigned, he listed that as one of the issues. He was murdered 2 years ago, so I couldn't get confirmation from him. But he told us all that she was, and that she benefited because they produced the sporting goods. So unfortunately that I cannot corroborate.
And do you know what kind of contractual arrangements existed between Sedgars and SASCOC?
Sedgars have been supplying SASCOC, I think, since about 2005. And they still supply them. You'll hear every now and then the press will come out and say how hideous the uniforms were. Athletes came back and they said, you know, I'm an extra small and I was given an extra large. There were complaints always from teams that returned as to the ill-fitting clothing, the ugliness of the clothing. So all I know is what I was told, and unfortunately, because Mr. Sindani is no longer with us, I couldn't get corroboration from him.
And do you know whether there are other service providers who provide SASCOC with similar uniforms besides Sedgars?
Yes, there are. As far as I know, they had contracts, I think, with a Chinese company, and there was a lot of issues in the media about that as well. One being that it's totally disloyal to source that kind of equipment from China when our own garment industry is in total crisis. So I'm afraid, as you know, I was suspended in 2009. The only other knowledge I know is basically from people who are still now involved in the sport or from the media. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for your attendance. I assure you that we will look into all of these matters. One of the objects of this inquiry, as far as I'm concerned, is to hear all sides. So be assured that we will listen to the other side as well, and hopefully we will arrive at the truth in the matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, with heartfelt gratitude, I haven't had an opportunity to be heard, and it's part of my healing process to be here. So I thank you all.
Thank you. Right. I see it's now 5 to 1. I'm not sure where we go from here.
Yeah. What do we do?
We get to take the lunch.
We can take lunch. We can take lunch.
All right. It seems that it's a convenient time to take the lunch. I think there is one witness here, the wrestling man.
Yeah. Thank you.
Wrestling.
We can do wrestling after that. If anybody else who wants to give evidence on it, didn't mention this in my opening remarks, please feel free to Mr. Boshoff in the meanwhile. And if you've got any written documents or submissions, please also give copies to Mr. Boshoff, and we will look at those as well. So on that basis, we'll adjourn until 2.
I'm probably going to miss my plane, but thank you. Thanks, Ali. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Where do we go now?